I want your bike! You can't have it!
Imagine stepping out onto your porch one calm morning, coffee in hand, ready to enjoy a quiet start to your day. Then a teenage boy walks straight into your driveway, points at your Harley, and says, "My mom said you'd give it to me." That's what happened to Mason Grant, a black man who built his life on discipline and respect and never owed anyone a thing. But one entitled neighbor and her spoiled son decided they were above all that. What started as a ridiculous demand was about to spiral into police lights, HOA threats, and a showdown that would shake the whole neighborhood. The day began like any other, quiet, calm, and ordinary. A black man named Mason Grant sat on his porch, sipping coffee, completely unaware that chaos was already heading his way. The sun was gentle, the street still, when a teenage boy, maybe 16, strolled straight into Mason's driveway and stopped in front of his Harley. "I'll take that one," the boy said, pointing at the bike like he was picking something off a menu. Mason blinked, half expecting a laugh that never came. "I'm sorry, what?" I said. "I'll take that one," the boy repeated. "Mom said you'd give it to me. She talked to the HOA." Mason set his mug down slowly, his brows tightening. "Excuse me?" The teenager just crossed his arms and nodded toward the cul-de-sac. Mason followed his gaze, and that's when he saw her. Patricia Mallory, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, stood there like she owned the neighborhood, sunglasses on, arms folded, and an expression that screamed authority she didn't have. Patricia gave a friendly wave, like they were old pals about to make a deal. Mason rose from his chair and called out, "You must be confused, kid." The boy huffed. "She said you don't even ride it anymore. The noise annoys people here." Mason stood, his calm starting to burn off. "Let me make this clear," he said firmly. "I do ride it, every weekend. I've had that Harley for 12 years. Customized it myself. That bike isn't just a machine, it's part of who I am. And nobody, not some kid, not an entitled HOA leader, was going to take it away." He walked across the lawn toward Patricia, who had now wandered onto his grass like it was community property. "What is this about, Patricia?" Mason asked. Patricia didn't flinch. "That motorcycle is an eyesore," she declared. "The engine's loud enough to shake windows. The board agreed you should donate it to someone who will actually appreciate it." Mason folded his arms. "And by someone, you mean your son?" Patricia smirked. "Exactly. Connor turns 17 next month. It'd be perfect." Mason laughed out loud, shaking his head. "You've lost your mind." Her smile faltered. The shift in her tone was icy. "Fine," she said coldly. "If you won't be neighborly, I'll escalate this. Have you ever had someone threaten you just because you wouldn't let them take what's yours?" Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where our viewers are tuning in from. And if you believe in standing up to entitled neighbors and fake authority, smash that like button and subscribe to Story Arc. Because some fights aren't about property, they're about principle. Mason Grant had no idea what Patricia meant by escalate, but soon enough he'd find out, and it came with flashing lights and sirens. The following Saturday started out perfect. The sun was warm, the sky clear, and Mason had just finished a short ride on his Harley. The engine still purred beneath him as he pulled into his driveway, parked beneath the oak tree beside his garage, and inhaled the fresh air. Then came the wail of police sirens. 2 patrol cars swung into his driveway like he'd just robbed a bank. Doors flew open, and 2 officers stepped out, hands hovering close to their belts. "Sir, step away from the motorcycle," one of them ordered. Mason lifted his visor, stunned. "Excuse me?" "Step away from the vehicle now." He complied, backing up slowly, completely confused. "Is there a problem, officer?" The older cop flipped open a notepad. "We received a report of stolen property on this site, and a local resident claims you unlawfully took possession of a motorcycle belonging to her minor son." Mason could hardly believe it. "Wait, what? That's my bike. I have the registration inside. I've owned it for over a decade." Just then, Patricia strutted across the street like she'd been rehearsing for this moment. Connor trailed behind, arms crossed, glaring at Mason as if he were the villain in some play. "There it is," Patricia shouted, pointing at the Harley like it was evidence in a crime scene. "That's the one. He promised to give it to my son, then backed out. That's theft, right?" Mason laughed out loud because surely this was a joke, but the officers didn't share his humor. "Do you have proof of ownership, sir?" "Yeah," Mason said, gesturing toward the door. "It's inside." Sir, please stay where you are, the second officer cut in. Mason froze. Seriously? The first cop nodded to his partner. We'll retrieve it. Just tell us where the papers are. Mason gave directions, keeping calm, though his jaw clenched. As they headed inside, Patricia leaned close enough for him to hear her smug whisper. You could have just done the right thing, she hissed. Now the whole neighborhood will know what kind of man you really are. Mason said nothing, but his patience was wearing thin. Minutes later, the two officers returned from Mason Grant's house, holding his title and registration in their hands. One of them flipped through the documents, exhaling sharply. It's his, the officer confirmed. Clean title, been registered to him for years. Patricia's confident smirk vanished instantly. Connor frowned, his voice breaking with frustration. That's not fair. He said I could have it. I said no such thing, Mason shot back, his patience finally slipping. Patricia blinked rapidly, scrambling for another angle. Well, maybe he didn't steal it, she stammered, but he lied to us. That's fraud. Even the cops were done by that point. The younger officer exchanged a look with his partner before saying flatly, Ma'am, this is a civil matter, not a criminal one. After that, they handed Mason his documents, gave him a brief nod, and left. Two very annoyed officers drove away while Patricia stood there fuming, her plan already falling apart. But Mason knew better than to relax. Patricia wasn't the type to back down after one failure. Sure enough, just 2 days later, he found a letter taped to his front door. The bold heading read, HOA Notice of Violation. It accused him of community disruption and failure to comply with neighborhood courtesy standards. The complaint went further, claiming that Mason had made false verbal promises to transfer his motorcycle to Connor and that his hostile attitude had created a toxic environment for the neighborhood. Mason let out a disbelieving laugh. This wasn't just a nosy neighbor being difficult anymore. This was a calculated move, an attempt to use the HOA's rules as a weapon to bully him into submission. That's when Mason decided to make a call, not to the HOA and not to Patricia, but to an old friend named Daniel Cross. Daniel worked at the state attorney's office, and though they hadn't spoken in a while, they'd served in the same veterans group years back. Mason told him everything, from the moment the teenage boy claimed the Harley to the bogus police report, and now this HOA stunt. Daniel didn't hesitate. Sounds like she's trying to weaponize the HOA to force a property transfer, he said. That's not just harassment. It might count as civil coercion. Mason sat up straighter. Civil coercion? That was a fight he was ready for. Daniel's words hit Mason Grant like a spark to dry grass. Civil coercion. That meant what Patricia was doing wasn't just annoying, it could actually be illegal. Daniel advised Mason to prepare everything. Write a full statement, he said. Attach your documentation, photos of the Harley, timestamps of ownership, even that HOA letter. Bring it all in for review. Mason spent the next 24 hours compiling every shred of evidence he had. He included the registration, maintenance receipts, and even pulled footage from his doorbell camera. The perfect moment where Connor stood in his driveway pointing at the Harley saying, Mom said you'd give it to me. That was his ace in the hole. When Mason finally walked into the state attorney's office, folder in hand, it felt like carrying ammunition to a battlefield. The receptionist's eyes widened as she took the heavy file marked with dates, images, and signed statements. Later that week, Daniel called him back. You'll never believe this, he said. Patricia filed a complaint here too, claimed you tried to trick her son with false promises. Mason sighed but stayed calm. Daniel continued, we reviewed both sides. There's a chance this goes to mediation, but don't worry, you're not the one under investigation anymore. That was when Mason realized something important. Patricia had picked a fight with the wrong man. The HOA meeting was scheduled for Wednesday evening. Normally, Mason wouldn't waste his time on something like that, but this time, he intended to show up and end it once and for all. He arrived early, sharp in a dark jacket, folder under his arm, and confidence in his stride. Patricia was already there, sitting near the front, chatting animatedly with two board members like she ran the place. Connor sat beside her, sulking, arms crossed. When Patricia spotted Mason, she rolled her eyes. Oh, you decided to show. Wouldn't miss it, Mason replied coolly, taking a seat. Soon the HOA president, a soft-spoken man named Harold Beckett, began the meeting. New business? He asked. Patricia's hand shot up instantly. "I'd like to file a formal action against Mr. Grant," she began, voice dripping with self-righteousness. Mason simply leaned back in his chair, ready to let her dig her own grave. Patricia launched into her performance like she had rehearsed it in front of a mirror. "I'd like to formally request action against Mr. Grant for failure to fulfill a verbal commitment, intentional community disturbance, and inappropriate conduct during interactions with myself and my son," she announced dramatically. Harold adjusted his glasses. "You're referring to the situation with the motorcycle?" "Yes," Patricia said with theatrical emphasis. "He misled my son, promised him the bike, then reneged. When I tried to mediate, he became aggressive." Mason stayed silent, letting her dig herself deeper. Patricia went on for nearly 5 minutes, painting herself and Connor as the innocent victims of his erratic behavior and unneighborly attitude. She even added, "I'm genuinely concerned about his mental state," which drew awkward looks from a few neighbors. When she finally stopped, Harold turned to Mason. "Mr. Grant, would you like to respond?" Mason stood, calm but firm, and placed his folder on the table. "First of all," he said evenly, "I never promised that child anything. I have security footage of him walking onto my property, pointing at my bike, and saying, 'Mom said you'd give it to me.' I've also got voice recordings of our entire exchange, time-stamped and stored." He handed over printed photos from his doorbell footage, copies of the police report clearing him of wrongdoing, and a letter from the state attorney's office confirming Patricia's claim had been dismissed. The board members leaned forward, whispering among themselves. "We weren't aware of these details," Harold murmured. "There's more," Mason added, distributing copies of the HOA violation letter Patricia had filed, along with his notarized statement outlining her harassment. The room fell silent. Patricia's face drained of color. Harold cleared his throat. "We'll need time to review this. Based on what we're seeing, this appears to be a misuse of our HOA complaint process." Patricia tried to interject, but Harold raised a hand. "Enough. You've said your part." The room fell silent. For once, Patricia Mallory had nothing to say. Neighbors who once nodded to her in fear now whispered, realizing how deep her lies went. Mason didn't need to speak. His evidence had done it for him. The meeting ended quietly. Patricia left with Connor, her authority gone. Within days, the HOA board launched a review that exposed her falsified complaints and abuse of power. By the week's end, her position was revoked and her reputation destroyed. Word spread quickly. The neighborhood she once ruled turned against her, filing new complaints of their own. Within a month, Patricia sold her house. The once feared queen of the HOA moved away quietly, leaving behind the neighborhood she'd spent years trying to control. As for Mason Grant, he didn't celebrate. He simply went home, parked his Harley under the oak tree, and enjoyed the one thing she could never take, his peace. If you believe in protecting what's yours and never bowing to fake power, hit like and subscribe to Story Arc, because real justice doesn't shout. It rides on.